This story still sends chills down my spine. Listen closely. I always loved the idea of having the house to myself. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, leaving me alone in our cozy suburban home. It was supposed to be a chance to revel in freedom, but little did I know, it would turn into a nightmare. The first night started like any other. I ordered some pizza, binge-watched Netflix, and eventually settled into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, a creaking noise startled me awake. I dismissed it as the house settled and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it again, louder this time. My heart raced as I lay frozen in bed, listening intently. Silence followed, but the feeling of unease lingered. I convinced myself it was just my imagination and forced myself to relax. As the hours passed, I managed to drift back to sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sharp thud downstairs. My pulse quickened, and I strained my ears for any further sounds. Minutes stretched into eternity, each one filled with dread. Then, footsteps echoed through the house, unmistakably real this time. Panic seized me as I realized I wasn't alone. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. But as the operator answered, a sudden realization struck. I hadn't locked the front door. With a sinking feeling, I realized that whoever was in the house was already close. I could hear their footsteps growing louder, drawing nearer to the stairs. Adrenaline surged through me as I scrambled out of bed, my mind racing with fear. I crept out of my room, my heart pounding in my chest. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an alarm, signaling my presence to the intruder. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down into the darkness below. That is when I saw him, a shadowy figure lurking at the bottom of the stairs, barely visible in the dim moonlight filtering through the windows. My blood ran cold as I realized the danger I was in. Without a second thought, I turned and dashed back into my room, locking the door behind me. I pressed myself against it, heart hammering as I listened for any sign of movement outside. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Just when I thought I could not bear the suspense any longer, I heard footsteps retreating downstairs. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. I knew I could not stay locked in my room, for Very had to find a way out. Summoning all my courage, I cracked open the door and peered into the hallway. It was empty, but the sense of danger lingered in the air. I tiptoed down the stairs, every sense on high alert. As I reached the bottom, a sudden gust of wind slammed the front door shut, making me jump. And that's when I saw an unmistakable glint of a knife lying on the floor. But as I dialed 911, a voice whispered from behind me, sending shivers down my spine.
You should have locked the door.
The evening started like any other. My parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving me alone in our home. I didn't mind. In fact, I relished the solitude. It was a chance to unwind, free from the usual family chaos. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over me. I tried to shake off the feeling, distracting myself with mindless activities. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the unease lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside felt like a sign of something sinister lurking just beyond the walls. As darkness descended, the house seemed to take on a life of its own. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, morphing into grotesque shapes that sent a chill down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew better. Then, as the clock struck midnight, a sudden noise shattered the silent sea of faint scratching coming from somewhere within the house. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to locate the source of the sound. It was like nails on a chalkboard, grating against my nerves with each scrape. I tried to convince myself it was just a mouse or a stray branch brushing against the window, but the rational explanations did little to ease my growing sense of dread. I felt like a character in a horror movie, teetering on the edge of a nightmare from which there was no escape. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling against the screen as I dialed my parents' number. But before I could hit send, a sudden chill swept through the air, freezing me in place. It was like a presence had entered the room, invisible but undeniably real. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw a figure standing in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. My blood ran cold as its eyes locked onto mine, gleaming with a malevolent light that sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to scream, to run, but fear rooted me to the spot. I was trapped, helpless against whatever horror had invaded my home. And as the figure advanced, its movements slow and deliberate, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was about to become part of a nightmare from which there was no waking up.
The house felt eerily quiet as I sat alone in the living room, my parents away for the weekend. Initially, the prospect of having the house to myself was exciting, but as the evening wore on, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I tried to distract myself with television, but the flickering images only served to amplify the silence that enveloped the house. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from outside, seemed to echo louder in the stillness. As darkness descended, casting long shadows across the room, my unease deepened. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something sinister lurked just beyond the edges of my vision. Then, a sound broke the silence, a soft thud from somewhere upstairs. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, hoping it was just the house settling. But then came another sound, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Panic gripped me as I realized I wasn't alone in the house. I hesitated, torn between fleeing and confronting whatever or whoever was upstairs. With trembling hands, I reached for the phone, ready to dial 911 at the first sign of danger. But before I could make a move, I heard it, a whisper, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. My name, spoken in a voice that sent chills down my spine. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The footsteps grew closer, the floorboards groaning under the weight of whoever or whatever was approaching. I held my breath, praying for it to be over, but the silence stretched on, suffocating in its intensity. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the footsteps stopped. The house fell silent once more, the only sound the hammering of my heart in my chest. I waited, every nerve on edge, but nothing happened. Eventually, I gathered the courage to venture upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I found nothing, no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused the noise. I was alone, or so I thought. As I turned to go back downstairs, a chill swept through the air, raising goosebumps on my skin. And that's when I heard it, a soft whisper, right behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway, bathed in moonlight. But as I stood there, frozen in fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That something unseen lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. And in that moment, I realized that the true horror of being home alone wasn't the fear of what might happen, but the certainty that it already had.
The house was unusually quiet as I sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the television casting flickering shadows across the walls. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me alone in our home. At first, the solitude was comforting, a chance to unwind after a long week. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over me. I tried to shake off the feeling, burying myself in my phone as I scrolled through social media. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside seemed to whisper of unseen dangers lurking just beyond the walls. As midnight approached, I decided to head to bed, hoping that sleep would offer some respite from my growing anxiety. But as I climbed under the covers and closed my eyes, a strange noise echoed through the house, a soft scratching coming from somewhere in the darkness. I lay frozen in bed, listening intently as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. Panic surged through me as I realized I was not alone in the house. My heart raced as I debated whether to investigate or hide under the covers like a child. Summoning all my courage, I climbed out of bed and crept down the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. The scratching led me to the basement door, the air heavy with anticipation. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle and pulled the door open. What I saw next filled me with terror, a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. My blood turned to ice as I realized that whatever was in the basement was not human. Without a second thought, I slammed the door shut and raced back to my room, heart pounding in my chest. I barricaded the door with anything I could find, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of what I had seen. But deep down, I knew that whatever was in the basement was not going to go away easily. Hours passed in agonizing silence, the only sound the pounding of my own heartbeat. And then, just as I began to think I was safe, I heard it, the sound of scratching at my bedroom door.